Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this slimy, slithering, and scary webinar. Obviously, lots of people are interested in slithering and slimy creatures, so I think we are going to have a good webinar tonight. Right. Once again, thank you for joining us. Werner Conradie is the Curator of Herpetology at Port Elizabeth Museum, Bayworld, and he holds a master's degree in environmental science and has 17 years experience in Southern African herpetophauna. His main research interests are the taxonomy, conservation, and ecology of amphibians and reptiles. And he's published numerous scientific papers on these subjects and has served on a number of conservation and scientific panels, including the South African Reptile and Amphibian Relisting Committees. Werner has undertaken research expeditions to various countries, including Angola, Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, obviously South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. He's going to talk to us tonight about his research experiences over the past 2 decades and the highlights and the lowlights, new species discoveries, expeditions, and the status of amphibian and reptile research in South Africa, with particular focus obviously on his home turf of the Eastern Cape. So Werner, if you'd like to switch your video on and join us, there we go, welcome. So if I'm going to hand over to you now. For everybody else, we will have the normal Q&A at the end, so please type your questions into the Q&A. We will also, for those of you watching on Facebook, we will monitor that as well. And at the end of Werner's presentation, we will pose all the questions to him. So Werner, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay, Peter, just let me know if there's any hiccups. I'm quite new to doing these webinars. Yeah, I want to thank the Sandparks Honorary Rangers for inviting me to present to you guys some of the work that I've been doing. So I want to take you on a journey, on my life journey and of exploration and in search of the slimy, the slithery, and the scary. And for those of you guys, and I'm sure all of you that is listening here, expect that I will be talking about frogs, lizards, and snakes. But if you didn't know, that's what I will be talking about. So yeah, as a teaser has an introduction has said, I will talk about my life of exploration and then the new discoveries that I've made on the way, and I will highlight some of the people that has played a role in my career and shaping my obsession with these critters. So yeah, like any young boy, my obsession actually started off as at school level when, as a kid growing up in the Karoo, I would rather spend the time in the field than like my brothers doing sport. So I'm the middle of 3 brothers. My dad is big into sports, and that's why my brothers is doing a lot of sport. But the thing that I'm interested since a kid was into the nature. And the first person that I must say, although she's not a scientist, that sort of planted the seed and told me to follow my passion and study the zoology was my mother. And so I need to thank her for opening up the opportunities for me. But yeah, I then went to varsity, and my first supervisor was Prof. Louis de Pree, and he introduced me into the amphibians. And those guys that don't know Louis de Pree, he's the author of the Frogs of Southern Africa and the app. But yeah, he was the first person that took me off on the expedition to the Western Cape to photograph some frogs for his field guide. And yeah, that was it. I was hooked for life. But yeah, I think a lot of the young students, of postgrad students that might be listening here, will know that there's not a lot of opportunities in the field, especially not with frogs and lizards and stuff. So I had no other option to become a teacher. But that was luckily short-lived, because in the first year of teaching, a post became available in herpetology, or assistant curator of herpetology at Port Elizabeth Museum. And of course, I applied for that post, and yeah, I was very lucky and privileged to get the job. And that was in late 2007. So yeah, so I've been the curator of herpetology at Port Elizabeth Museum for the last 14 years. But before me, my mentor, under who I work there, is the world-renowned herpetologist, Bill Branch, and you guys all should know his field guides. I think it's, we call it the Bible. Everybody still page through the field guide, or I think it's called Snakes and Other Reptiles of Southern Africa. Yeah, it was Bill Branch that introduced me into the exploration and discovery of new species. So yeah, what I want to do is I want to dedicate this talk to Bill Branch, who unfortunately passed away in 2018 after suffering a short illness of motor neuron disease. But yeah, Bill opened up life for me. Before I started working in the museum, I've never traveled outside, to be honest, except for studying up in Potchefstroom. I've never traveled outside the Eastern Cape province. So Bill opened up a new sort of life for me. And up to now, for the last 14 years being curator of the collection, I traveled to about 8 different African countries, mostly Southern African countries, as this map will indicate. And because I'm working in the museum, one of the things that I do is I collect a lot of specimens, and I've collected over 8,000 different specimens for the collection. Just to give you a quick background, the Port Elizabeth Museum is the 3rd largest herpetological collection in Africa. In South Africa, it's only exceeded by the Transvaal Museum. So it's a huge resource for scientists all over the world. Now, in my time of doing research in Africa, I've and this is for the twitchers out there. I don't twitch birds. I do would do some birding, but I'm into reptiles and amphibians. And I've documented, and I quickly run a check on our database. Sorry, I'm checking just on my notes on the other side. I've collected about 340 different species of reptiles and 150 different species of amphibians. And to give you an idea, Africa have only about, or have 1,700 species of reptiles and 800 species of amphibians. So I still have a lot to go. But yeah, in the last 14 years, I've published about 100 scientific papers, of which 30 of those I describe new species of reptiles and amphibians. So yeah, I think there's many more to come. But for the rest of this talk, I just want to introduce you to some of the highlights, expeditions that I've been involved, and show you some of the new species that I found and stuff as we go on. So yeah, I want you to just all sit back, enjoy, and listen to rambling off. So yeah, my first big expedition was into southwestern Angola. Now, the people that do know a little bit of the history of Angola, it went through one of the most brutal civil wars that lasted about 4 decades. So when we went in 2009, the country just opened up for new exploration and biodiversity studies. So there was a lot of collaboration, and this expedition was headed by Brian Huntley of Sanby, and with some of the Angolan colleagues. So it was a biodiversity project and capacity building. So this is one of the architectural wonders of Angola. This is the Leba Pass, going down from the Hila Escarpment down to the desert. Just some photographs of me active in the field to show that I was actually there. But yeah, this is on top of the Escarpment, Bill Branch there. And he was the one that took me along as sort of his assistant. And I was barely working a year at the museum. So I spent my first year at the museum just sort of learning the tricks and the trades, how to identify amphibians and reptiles. It took me a year, more than a year, 2 years, before I actually went into the field with Bill. It's amazing landscapes down there. We had some really fun times. Another person along my career that sort of shaped me, but more from a genetic side, because up to then, he would have. I was sort of old school, looking at morphology. If a species look different, it's a different species. But Crystal Talia, the person there in the red shirt there, she works for Sanby, and she's a geneticist, and she introduced me to the field of genetics. So yeah, she's another person that shaped my career. Now, it is amazing working in southwestern Angola, where you have ancient plants like the Welwitschers. But yeah, some of the amazing finds that we got there is like the feather-tailed gecko, and this gecko was just described a year before our expedition, and it was collected by Wolf Hawk in the 70s. But yeah, these are amazing geckos that mimics scorpions with that tail, and they live under very thin rock flakes. And one of the highlights of that expedition, and my first ever new species that I discovered, is a Chela mountain reed frog that I described three years later. So yeah, first expedition, first new species. We also documented the ashy reed frog, and up to before our expedition, it was only known from 2 specimens that was collected 70 years ago, and it was called the ashy reed frog because of the preservative. People didn't know what the colors of the frog looks, but in the end, it turns out to be actually a really colorful frog. Yeah, first ever record of the Physis shovel-snouted snake for Angola. And then another 2 highlights is we described 2 new species of sand lizards from Angola. One after Wolf Hawk, who is the ex-curator of the Transvaal Museum that also sadly passed away this year. And then Brian Huntley, we named one after him. He was the sort of the expedition leader. And then just earlier this year, we described a new gecko from that same expedition that we called Aphrodero donvei, and common name just the Iona flat gecko. Bill wanted, this was one of Bill's last projects, and he wanted to name this gecko after his wife. So it's named after his wife, Donvei. And it is one of the most colorful flat geckos that you can get. Another expedition that Bill took me on to is to the Google Forest. And those guys that don't know it, but maybe have read about it, there's an ecologist, Julian Baylis, that just one day went on to Google Earth and found this big forest patch that seems untouched. And so he launched the expedition to Mount Mabo. And due to all the publicity, it was nicknamed the Google Forest. So we were invited along on one of these expeditions. And from that mountain, Bill described an endemic gecko called Natsukambi. Natsukambi is a chawi, if I'm correct, the name for chameleon. He also described a bush viper from there. Unfortunately, I've never seen one of these, but I've seen a lot of the chameleons. And then this is one of the endemic rampholians from there, or the pygmy chameleons. And I do really like the scientific name, Rampholium maspictus. Maspictus refers to colorful man. And if you look at the top corner, you can clearly see how colorful it is. And at the bottom is a female, usually a dull species, but the males, and this one is quite colorful. Anyway, Bill always smiles on the face after about 3 hours hike out of the mountain. And this is a forest chameleon, Mueller's forest chameleon, or Trisaurus muelleri, is one of the largest chameleons on African soil. Then in 2009, and then a follow-up expedition in 2011, I went to Mount Mulanje. You can call it the mountain in the skies. It rises from 900 meters elevation to 1,800, 2,000 meters, and the highest peak about, I think, I can't remember actually, I think it's just under 3,000. But anyway, you hike up and you live in these huts that is maintained by the Mountain Club of Malawi. Nice scenery. You will recognize some of these plants do also occur in South Africa. Here we are on the top of Sapitwa, and the lady there in the middle is actually our librarian or ex-librarian at the Port Elizabeth Museum. And as a kid, she hiked up Mount Mulanje and she desperately wanted to go back. So I took her along on one of the expeditions. it's a really very interesting area. One of the most interesting frogs that you get there is the mongrel frog, Notophini broadlii. And at that stage when we were up there, it was a monotypic genus. A monotypic genus or species means that it's only known from one individual, or not one individual, only one animal. There's not a second species or a third species. And the mongrel just comes from that nobody could place it. Is it now a little blikslanertjie or kakko, or was it a river frog, or was it? Nobody could place it, so they just sort of say it's got something of everything, so they call it the mongrel frog. But I like to call them mountain toads or mountain frogs. Anyway, another little endemic there is a Mulanje mountain skink, quite common up at the huts. And then they also got some rampholians up there. And then this is an endemic river frog up there called the Media johnstonii. 2010, we got some funding from the Conservation International to go in search of lost frogs and frogs that haven't seen since the initial description. So we went up to Chimanimani and Chirinda Forest in Zimbabwe. We were after the bush, the cave squeaker, or Afterleptus troglodytes. We never found it, but one of our colleagues, Francois Becker, did find it 6 years later. But anyway, there's me and some of my colleagues, James Harvey and Michael Cunningham, and we went up there to Chimanimani. That looks pretty much like Cape Fold Mountains. Of course, we were after the cave squeaker, so we were in some of the caves. But yeah, we only found bats, no frogs in there. Anyway, we went over then to Chirinda Forest, beautiful forest. Some of the highlights of that expedition was the berg adder, and there's a lot of work going on in the berg adder, and that the Zimbabwean population potentially will be described as a separate species. Then this is Duberia reduciana, or the Zimbabwe slug-eater, and those guys that maybe know Don Broadley, Zimbabwean herpetologist. This was the very first species that he ever described. So yeah, there's also the Rampholia marshallow, the Marshall stumptail chameleon that you get in Chirinda Forest. And they got this protrusion on the nose, really nice. The males is a lot smaller, nice chameleons. And then a little endemic, the Chimani stream frog. We're currently working on these guys from a genetic level. Then another expedition that Bill Branch took me on, that was funded by National Geographic, was to the most northeastern corner of Angola, Lake Garumbo. And it was also the project was led by Brian Huntley, and the idea was to proclaim this area as an official protected area. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it is now a protected area. This was the expedition. We were a small team. We were only there for 7 days. The road conditions in Angola, you can imagine, is not too good, but the scenery is amazing. This is a view from up the hill looking down to this lake, which is a natural lake, one of the largest in Angola. Now, this is a banded water cobra, the first ever record from Angola. And I have a little story about this one. I know Bill keep on telling the story differently, but we were in a boat crossing the river because the lake is on the other side. And as we pulled away, the boatsman shouted, "Cobra, cobra," and in Portuguese, all snakes are called cobras. So I leaned over and I see the snake floating there, and I said to Bill, "Oh, well, it looks exactly the same as the snake we caught the previous night, the ornate water snake." And you can see how these two look pretty similar for the untrained eye, and I was still a youngster. And I grabbed the snake, and it turned out to be a water cobra. Very lucky that I didn't get bitten then. Anyway, from that expedition, we described a new species of reed frog named after Raymond Laurent. That was a French researcher. So this is the male of Raymond's reed frog, and then the female. And you will recognize that it looks pretty similar to the ashy reed frog. And actually, at some stage, they were called the ashy reed frog, or was referred to that. But we showed genetic evidence and morphological evidence and call differences that it's a separate species. Anyway, last year, I had the privilege of describing this snake after Ball Branch, but we collected this snake in 2011, but we didn't think anything about it until I started working on the morphology and the genetics. So this is a swamp snake. They live in the flood, like in the swamps, flooded water. There's a similar species living in the Okavango Delta, and they live off of fish. Another expedition into Angola, part of the OCACOM project, we looked at the water quality of the Okavango system. But this is the first time that I was introduced into post-war areas, or in, oops, sorry about that, in Angola. And yeah, this building, I've been back to that same town called Mulanje, and this building is still standing. It's not been cleared up, and you can see people are living out of it. This was bombed during the Angolan War. And everywhere where we went, you would see these old tanks and stuff everywhere. But yeah, we found some really interesting frogs. This is called the Lemaire's toad. And this is, I wrote a little paper a few years ago where I compared this to river frogs. Or for the older people out here, we used to call them ranas. So the title of the paper was Wannabe Rana. And this frog lives in the swamps, and they've got this more sharp snout and long toes for diving and living in this swampy area. So this is the female and the male. And in breeding season, they go really bright yellow, from sort of olives to bright yellow, and then they go back to normal camouflage color. And then we documented the most southern records of the ashy reed frogs from that southeastern Angola. And then this is what I call the Ivan's, the aquatic skink. And the discovery, this specimen led to us doing some work, and actually it used to be part of the skinks or mubuyas or Trachylepis. We reinstated the genus. This is also one of the few skink species that have placental development. So yeah, and this is the first ever record of the Kalahari legless skink for Angola. They are quite widespread in the Kalahari, all the way from southern Angola to Botswana or the Richtersveld. I threw just in this one just to show some variation, but this is the worm lizard, Zygaspis quadrifrons, very few records from Angola. Then I've always been, also been quite privileged to be involved in explorations of the Sky Islands or the Inselbergs of northern Mozambique. And a lot of projects were, Crystal Tolley was the PI on those, and she invited me along. And these are impressive mountains. There's quite a few of those, and because of the high elevation, there's all these forest patches around it, and they're catching the fog from the coast, and so it's like sort of mid-altitude rainforest. And this is us on top of Mount Mabu, again, the Google Forest. At the Google Forest, we discovered the montane forest tree snake that, with collaboration with Bill Branch, we described as new species, I think 2018. So this is a harmless snake, and they eat mostly frogs. This is a gliding lizard, really amazing lizards living in more in the transitional Miambu woodland, and they can flatten out their bodies and sort of glide from branch to branch. Yeah, the only problem is due to their bright blue tail, you can easily spot them. But yeah, this is an amazing that's actually lacerted, believe it or not. That is a boreal living up in the trees. This is the king dwarf gecko. We're still working on it to determine if it's actually an undescribed species. We found them at all the forests, and the closest known population is actually Mount Mulanje. So yeah, king dwarf gecko, Rex means king, and these guys are really large geckos. All of us will know the little geckos running up walls in the day, the Cape dwarf gecko. These guys are, I would almost say, sort of not double the size, but maybe 1.5 times the size of those guys, and they've got these bright colors. And I had to throw in this photograph to show that we don't only have frogs in Southern Africa or in Africa. We also got, this is not a snake. This is a Sicilian, which is actually a frog. And we found these guys in 4 of the forest, and amazing amphibians. Another photograph of Mass Pictus, the colorful man of the marble pygmy chameleon. And then we documented the first ever record of the Shire slug eater, or Dubera shirana, which is actually known mostly from Mulanje, Malawi area, up onto the Rift Mountains. This was the first record for Mozambique. And then we discovered the undescribed species of Natsakambi from about 3 or 4 of the forest patches that we've been at. And then we found new populations of the mongrel frog, and we described eventually about 3 species, each Inselberg having its own species. This one is from Mount Namuli, called Bailisai, and as I said earlier, Julian Baylis is the person that sort of discovered, if you can say that, the Google forest and was the first person documenting this frog. And this one is from Rabawi. Couldn't come up with a better name than the Rabawiensis, which mean Rabawi mountain. Now, we weren't the first people that documented this. Don Broadley in the 60s actually documented it for the first time, but didn't think anything about it. So from Mount Rabawi. So we followed these footsteps. We found them in fruit genetics, morphology, calls. We described it as a new species. This is a little tree frog. You can call them laughing frogs. You will hear everywhere in the little forest this sort of laughter, and it is the tree frog. And this one was named after Don Broadley, also from that same expedition. He documented and say these differences in the call, and you think it's different. So John Poynton described it eventually as a new species, but there is some debate going on if it's actually really valid or not. So yeah, there's another endemic pygmy chameleon from Mount Namuli, also named after Colin Tilbury. Colin Tilbury is the person that wrote the Chameleons of Africa book. He's actually a medical doctor, but well known for his chameleon research. This one is mostly just known from Mount Namuli, but over the expeditions we found them in a lot of different forests, and we all thought they were separate species, but eventually the genetics shows that they're actually one species that has just been isolated over time. I just threw in one of the bush squeakers up there, Francis bush squeaker, that we found all over these forests, and they might all represent, all the different forests might represent a separate species. This is another one of the dwarf geckos, king dwarf geckos that we're working on. And then a legless skink, also found that all the forests with deep genetics and might potentially be separate species. Here's another one of the Natsakambis that is undescribed at the moment. Then one of the more recent Mozambique expeditions that I've been on is, they call it the Lost Forest. Again, it was Julian Baylis that went on Google Earth, and he found this image of this Inselberg. And for those that don't know what Inselberg is, it's basically just a granite mountain with sheer cliffs, and usually not a lot of vegetation, more grass standing out above the low-lying area. But this one was unique. It had the sheer cliffs around it, but the forest on top. And so we launched the expedition there. And to give you a side perspective, this is what it looks like. And because the forest is so isolated up there, we thought, oh, geez, there's going to be a lot of interesting things up there, because how do you get up there? And if you're up there, you must speciate and become different. But anyway, we had to employ professional climbers to set up ropes for us to go up the mountain. And yeah, we found some interesting stuff at the base of the mountains and on the top of the mountains, and we're still working on it. So this is a Jarinda toad at the lower base. And then we found some Sicilians, some tree frogs, and also some rampholians. But yeah, the genetic proof that they're just similar to the ones from the other mountains. And then I was told I need to show some rain frogs. So here is a rain frog. Yeah, this one is potentially a new species. And and this one occurs on top of that mountain. It looks totally different to a low-lying species, and we're working on it. It's got very low genetics, so differences. So we hope we'll still need to see what it will produce for us. Anyway, this is one of the more recent big expeditions that I've been involved in. And this is part of the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project. And you guys might have heard about these guys with the Macaras going all the way down from the source of the Okavango rivers in Angola all the way to the pans to document the biodiversity along the way and what impacts what threats and impacts there is on the river system, because in the end, it influenced the Okavango Delta. The Okavango Delta is one of the biggest inland lakes in the world, or deltas. And in this image, you can see I don't know if you'll see my marker, but you see the big pan area, the Okavango Delta panhandles, and these two rivers going up into Angola. So it's clear just from the image that you can see that what is going on in Angola influence what's going down in the pan. So we were set on this expedition into the area that's I can't speak Portuguese, but it's translated to the land at the end of the earth. It's nutrition poor. It is hard to get into, and the Portuguese just didn't want to explore and develop that area. So we set up there with our land cruisers, a team of demining people from the Halo Trust, funding from National Geographic, and we went into that area. A lot of old war remembrance, like tanks and stuff there. Yeah, nice scenery. A lot of bridges, temporary bridges have been built, and these are what we found. At the sources, it's not just a little spring that we used to hear in South Africa. It's this big dams, lakes with peat, and then they slowly seep and forming rivers that grow and grow and grow until it reaches into the Okavango Delta. This one here is actually the Guanabale river source. We lived there in tents up to 2 months at a time, eating rice and beans. This is one of the snakes that from the expeditions that was new. And this one we named after Bill Branch. He was the lead herpetologist of the Okavango project. I eventually took over from him, but we honored him in naming this one after him. But we also had another snake, house snake further north, which is common more in this larger Zambezi system, and we call this Bodon freydii. Yeah, and another promised rain frog, this time a new one from Angola. I'm still struggling to pronounce this name. We described this last year. It's called Briviceps umbulunga, or the Angolan rain frog, and the name refers to the local tribe name for rain and frog. Yeah, this is an unknown tree frog, common, again, like a laughter type call that is all over these lakes and woodlands. And we collected them, and we actually was alluded to the presence first by the unique tadpole that is like an eel, like a blind type tadpole that lives in these deep peat marshes, and then I could relate to that. It's a tree frog, but we didn't find any tree frogs, so I actually brought a few of them back, and my wife actually raised them, and eventually we had the first sort of glimpse of how they look. In the next expedition, we found them all over the place. Anyway, we published a paper during lockdown, a little bit of my lockdown projects of the Witte clicking frog. So we documented them for the first time in Angola. They're only known from northern Zambia and the Congo, and so we documented them from Angola. So we published a paper on the distribution. We also had the first record of the Kalahari purple gloss snake, first record of Kalahari ground gecko, first record of Chobe dwarf gecko. This is just a few of them, in the Caprivi rough skull lizard. To give you an idea, before I head over to a little bit of local stuff, in our Angolan expeditions, that area that we worked in, there was only about 56 species known from the area from scattered records. We increased that to 152. It's almost 100 new species records. We documented 12 new country records, 4 new species described, and we've got about roughly about 10 candidate species that we need to describe from those expeditions. But anyway, back a little closer to home. I've been busy working in South Africa, specifically in the Eastern Cape since 2008. Started off working closely with Eastern Cape parks, especially Jan Venter, who is now at the old Sarsfield campus, or George campus of the Nelson Mandela University. So he sort of asked me to survey all the Eastern Cape parks. So I've been working in all the Eastern Cape parks, from Mukambati, Silaka, Gluleka, Tweza, and then also inland to Tsholwana, Komando Drift, Fordyce, Mapofo, and all of those reserves. So this is Mukambati. This is one of the frogs that we collected in Mukambati, the Powers long-reed frog. And before that, they used to be just all lumped under the Nasutas or the long-reed frogs. But my new records, or the records that we got from there, we could do the genetics, the call analysis to show that it's actually a separate species. So it's an endemic South Africa species that occur up to KZN. The Natal defolding frogs, we found them all over the Transkei. In the past, they were only known from a handful of records. We're still unsure about the subspecies status, but we're working on that. Oh, another promised rain frog. We've done a lot of work on rain frogs from a genetic side, and we've got currently about 7 undescribed species in South Africa. This used to be just part of the Mozambique rain frog, but the name that we allocate to this from the Transkei is the penthri, or now called the Eastern Cape rain frog. This is Cacosternums, or the Blacksloniki, and this is new records of the mountain caco from we got them at Mukambati and up at Nkadu, Bazia Mountains, and then striped caco. I think this is only the second record for the Eastern Cape. And then one of my little babies, and a lot of people will know, who knows me, knows I talk a lot about Thorin's caco, or Cacosternum thorini, and this is a new species of Blacksloniki that I described from Hogsback. Maybe one of my favorite places to go back to for holiday is Hogsback. And in search of the Amatola toad, we found this new species, and we call it Thorin's caco, thorini, after the J.R. Tolkien's King on the Mountain, or the King of the Dwarfs, Thorin Oakenshield. And I need to acknowledge my wife here for coming up with this creative name. And everybody thinks that Hogsback is the sort of the origin of, or the inspiration behind The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But anyway, so this is one of my little babies that turns, I think now 6-7 years. It's actually listed endangered, and it only occurs in the wetlands up in the Amatola Mountains. Kleur frogs, really unique frog occurring all over the East Coast from KZN to Natal. We sort of triple the amount of distributional records for the Eastern Cape, and I think the threat status of this actually dropped a little bit because of that. But they live in this really slow flowing streams in the northern Eastern Cape in the KZN. Another project that I've been working on for a very long time is the Hewitt's Ghost Frog, in collaboration with Eastern Cape Parks, monitoring populations in the Baviaans Kloof and also in the Longmore Forest. This is an endemic ghost frog, and it's also listed as threat. And they've got these unique tadpoles living in these streams with these big sucker mouths, scraping off the algae and stuff. So we've been monitoring these guys for a long time. And then I did mention the Amatola toad. We went in search of this Amatola toad. At some stage, we actually thought that it were extinct, but with the work of the Endangered Wildlife Trust and Jean Tarrant, a lot of more records has been documented, and there's actually now plans of conservation action plan for these guys. So they're holding on there. There used to be historically, the records say that they will breed in masses. We haven't seen, I think, maybe in the last, I don't know the exact numbers, we've seen handfuls of these guys, not too many. Anyway, another project that I'm working on is the striped grass frog. The type locality is Angola, so this blends or fits in really nice with my work in Angola. So the type locality is Angola, but they occur all the way down to about East London. So we've been collecting them all across, and genetics shows that the Eastern Cape and the KZN populations is actually a separate species. And then the reverse is the sharp-nosed grass frog. Type locality is the Transkei, Eastern Cape, but they occur all the way into Angola and further up into Africa. And also the genetics are starting to show us that there's multiple species. So just to sort of show why it's important to work in places like Angola to document and to know better what's going on closer to home. Anyway, another project worked with Crystal Tolley, and actually one of my students also did some more work on it, is the little bush squeakers. Now, we've got 3 species in South Africa. We've got the Stenodactylus, common bush squeaker, or we got the Wahlberg's squeaker, and then we've recently split the Wahlberg's bush squeaker into 2, and this one is the endemic one in the Transkei called Leptis wageri. Anyway, I just threw in a little photograph of a chameleon. South Africa got one of the highest diversities, of actually Bradipodium only occurs almost in South Africa, but they've got a really high diversity of them. And this one is an endemic one, living from about Port St. John's to about Mkompati, called Pondo dwarf chameleon. We also documented the Fitzsimmons long-tailed ceps that used to only known to occur around the Eastern Cape, PE area. We documented all the way to to Port St. John's, and it actually proves to be common and wide. Not common, it's a rare thing. It's very hard to find. Very few people can say that I've ever seen one. But due to the big range, we had to drop its conservation status from vulnerable to, I think it's least concern at the moment. We're also working on the Natal black snake. This is sort of mostly a forest-dependent species, and we expected that the genetics will show that they are each forest patch is different, but actually there is very little genetic differences. We documented new ranges for the inland mountains around Mthatha and Mount Fear. So and up in the Amatola Mountains, you get this legless skin called the short-snouted legless skin, Fracantius breviceps. We've done some work on them and actually split them up into 3 species. The Mupulanga ones, we described 2 new species out of them, Acanthus alpilaris and Acanthus facastromensis. And then currently we're working on some of the flat geckos. This one is from Maboiki, the Pondo flat gecko, and then the Amatola flat gecko. This is the 2 main groups of flat geckos we're working on in Eastern Cape. And currently there's multiple undescribed species in this group. So we still don't really know how many there are. And then also the little thread snakes. This is one of the smallest snake species that you can get in the world, as the thread snakes, or the leptotyphlops. And the forest thread snake is a shorter, fatter one. And every single population that we found at the moment, we get to a sort of undescribed species. Yeah, I think that is me. I've been going on for a long time, and I think I was told I need to be busy for about 45 minutes, and I think I made it. If you want to know more about the work that we do here at the Port Elizabeth Museum or Bayworld, you can follow these two links, the Facebook group for African Herpetology Lab, and then Bayworld. And it will direct you to our website where you can see the publications, new species, and things that we're doing. Peter, I think that's me.
From us, thank you very much for your time and the effort that you've put into the talk, and thank you for joining us. We really did enjoy it, and hopefully we can have another one in the future, and you can tell us some of the progress with the naming of your new species, etc., or tell us that you've got your PhD, whichever. But anyway, thank you for joining us, and thank you from us, and to everybody who joined us, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming along and seeing the creepy, slimy, and all sorts of things. There was only about one toad, and if I remember, toads are not slimy. It's only frogs that are slimy. Am I right, Werner?
Yeah, you can say that, especially to think about the platanas. They really slimy little things.
All right. Well, once again, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who joined us. We're still looking at another date for another webinar, but we don't have any details at the moment. But we will email people once we know, and then we're going to be taking a break until next year. So, Werner, once again, thank you and for joining us. Thank you for your time, and thank you to everybody who joined us. And from the Honorary Rangers, good night, keep well, and keep safe.